listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your resource to better understand and execute successful podcast ad campaigns. Hello and welcome to the Podcast Advertising Playbook. I'm your host, Heather Osgood. Today, I am joined by Jason Fialkov. He is the Vice President of Sales at Claritas. Jason, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Heather. It's great to be talking to you.
So I am so interested to talk about Claritas, just to kind of kick us off. I know that Claritas has a really rich history and obviously has been working in the podcast space for a while. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the company and kind of what you guys do?
Absolutely. So Claritas has been around for like 5 decades. If you studied marketing in college, you probably studied the Prism segment. So Claritas really pioneered audience segmentation in the 1970s. Obviously, it's taken a lot of different forms since then. Most recently, it was then acquired by Nielsen and spun out of Nielsen about 8-9 years ago. So now we're owned by the Carlyle Group, a massive private equity firm. I came into the company about 3 years ago with the most recent acquisition, which was Arts AI. So Claritas, since spinning out of Nielsen, has made about 5 acquisitions. The first really venture into podcast measurement was when they acquired Barometric. That was their first acquisition.
Right.
And then a few companies in the middle, and the most recent one is Arts AI.
Mm-hmm.
Between the combined company, right, the past couple of years, we've really spent building one platform, one dashboard, one methodology, and kind of bringing the best of both worlds from the Claritas attribution product, which has this identity graph, true deterministic measurement, with Arts AI, which used more of a probabilistic, machine learning type of AI to match an exposure to a conversion. And now it's the best of both worlds with the combined company. We're calling the combined dashboard Insights 2.0, but we're going to rebrand that here pretty soon as we get more adoption. Claritas has been around for a long time. We really, since the Arts AI acquisition, we've layered AI in throughout the product. And, we do a lot, right? We're not an audio only company, but we are, I believe, the number one measurement, provider for the digital audio space. We have some competitors now who in the startup space who have, focused on podcasts who are, I think, pretty close. But pretty sure we are still the top in terms of the amount of impressions that we measure across digital audio.
Oh, that's so interesting. I feel like I see and hear, different reports about like hosting companies and who's hosting the most, podcasts and things like that, or maybe has the most downloads per month. I've never seen a report, I don't think, that shows which attribution company is kind of trafficking or, attributing, the campaign. So does Claritas kind of sit at the top there? I didn't realize that.
It's a good call out, right? I don't think I've seen such a report either, but from what I know, kind of inside baseball about the industry,
Sure.
There's obviously a couple podcast specific players in the space that do some great things that, really started in things like transcription and podcast, media planning. But measurement's a popular space and it's been heating up and getting more competitive over the past few years for sure.
Yeah. What I really like about Claritas is the rich history that you have. And I think that sometimes in podcasting, we can get a little isolated and almost a little like heads down, and we forget to like look up and look at what everyone else is doing. And I think that it's really helpful that Claritas has all of the information and knowledge about tracking lots of different formats as opposed to just podcasting. Do you think that that has had a positive impact on what you're able to do on the podcast side of things?
Totally. And I love that because we didn't even prep any of these questions, but you're really just teeing me up here, Heather, because that's really our view at Claritas, is not to measure podcasts or audio in a silo, but to measure it, alongside your other digital channels, right? CTV, display, even broadcast, right? So we feel that, measuring audio in the same platform using similar methodologies as your other channels will actually give audio higher attribution and kind of a bigger piece of that pie. You've been hearing, for years now in the audio space that audio gets, 20 to 25% of media time and only 5% of investment. So we are firm believers that, by looking at your audio alongside other channels, we can grow that to a place closer to 20%. We really think that if advertisers using just kind of a standard measurement company, one of the big guys like Google, they're just not getting a fair shot at the impact that audio is really having in their media mix.
Mhm.
Whereas us and our audio competitors are more accurate than kind of just a standard measurement channel that wasn't built for audio like we were.
Right. I
Mhm.
love that. And I know I've had guests on their show before that are from media buying companies that buy all kinds of, different channels. And one of the stories that I love the most is let's look at our whole media mix. And when you are using podcast, you're going to see a bigger lift in your video, or you're going to see a bigger lift here or there. And for so long, I feel like we have said, like, let's test out podcasting. And we put it over in the corner by itself and we're like, hey, how is it performing? And you have to put it in the mix, right? Because everything influences everything. And if we know that by running audio, it's going to make our other channels perform better, why wouldn't we do that? And it isn't just about what podcasting can do, it's what podcasting can do and how it can improve the performance in other areas as well.
Totally. That's exactly how we describe it. And we have done some studies with some of our, major media company partners that shows, what impact adding podcasting does to your other channels, right? Some of these other media companies do have other channels, right? Obviously, we'll probably talk about how video and, podcasting are really coming together, and which I think is great for the podcasting industry. But obviously defining a podcast is something that everyone's thinking about now when you see the increase in video. So a lot happening there. But look, even before this, I think more recent video buzz, we've been saying we should measure podcasts alongside your other video, especially channels,
Mhm.
to really get a good look at the impact podcast is driving, but not just in a silo, right? How it's actually helping touch points. And then, again, we do a lot of business in digital audio, so streaming and podcasting, but no one trusts, their favorite podcast hosts, more, right? That's the most trusted voice they hear in advertising, right? And even
Mhm.
more than social. Easier for us to say because social definitely doesn't let us in yet. But podcasting with that really one-to-one listening experience, drives just incredible impact and still not getting a fair share. And part of our mission is to help that grow.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is certainly not new, but I heard somebody say the other day that like your favorite podcast host is your best friend that you've never met. And I'm like, I love that because, you listen to them all the time and you always just feel like you know them because
100%.
yeah,
Yeah,
you listen
100%.
to them so often.
Yeah, I had like a real world experience like that the other day. So, I listened to Professor Galloway, the Prof G Pod, uh,
Okay.
going through an interesting time where they just kind of got acquired from Vox or split off from Vox, and ran into him the other day in New York at a place in New York. And I went to say hello because I feel like I listen to him so much. And if you're not familiar, he talks a lot about business. I listen to a lot of business podcasts as a revenue guy, but he also talks a lot about like fatherhood, and a lot
Mm.
about politics, other topics that I'm interested in, and that I tend to like his point of view, not everything, right, but some of it. So I saw him, in person, and I went to say hi, and my friend who was with me was like, "Dude, what are you doing? Like, so uncool to go say hi to someone that you recognize from media." I was like, "Dude, not at all. Like, this guy knows me." But he was the most friendly guy ever. And the next day I heard his podcast, and he was like talking about basically how he totally loves when his fans come and say hi to him. So I like sent it to my friend. I was like, "See, he
Oh,
didn't mind
good.
saying hi to just another guy in the bar."
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that's just my little anecdote that happened just this year.
I love it. I love it. That's so cool. So, what do you feel like are some of the biggest misconceptions that marketers have when it comes to measuring podcast advertising?
Sure. I mean, so many marketers still don't know that you can measure it accurately, right? I
Right.
mean, so many think, oh, if it's an RSS feed, you can't pixel it, but we can, right? We use prefixes in the RSS feeds, right? We place a Claritas pixel. Claritas pixels are on at any given day over 10,000 advertiser websites or apps, and then we're partnered with pretty much any media company, podcast or beyond that you can think of, that we have our pixel on. So really it's, I think the biggest misconception is for some major advertisers too, right? We're not just talking about mom and pop shops, is that, podcasting is immeasurable. That's still a conversation we have, every day.
Mhm.
Now for the more sophisticated, advertisers that obviously do know that you can accurately measure podcasts, I would say the biggest misconception, that we kind of come across, is, I guess there's a few, right? I think one is actually the allergy to pixels, right? A lot of advertisers think that a pixel might slow down their site or, be not
Mm.
privacy safe, right? It might
Mhm.
impact their user experience. And that's just not true, right? We've done just so many tests. It's a 1 by 1 pixel on a site. It doesn't slow anything down. It doesn't really slow down the load times. So that is also something my team and I, get brought into a lot of conversations from our media, partners to talk to their clients about. And there are other ways we can measure it. We can do server to server integrations. We can do custom builds. But the pixel is kind of still, I think the easiest way to run an attribution campaign in audio
Yeah.
or out. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Talk to me a little bit about the lift studies that you do, because I know that lift is a really important part of measurement.
Sure, sure. So, you kind of have two options when you're looking at a way to measure, sales impact, right? And we like to
Mhm.
talk about outcomes, right? That's kind of
Yes.
how I like to talk about the main service that we offer the audio industry. It's measurement, but it's really attribution, which is basically showing the advertiser the conversions that they could have potentially driven during a campaign. And then there's
Mhm.
incremental lift. And we uniquely do that very well because Claritas matches back to our identity graph, right? So we can actually have a kind of a control group or a hold group when we're seeing actually true incremental conversions that happen from an advertising campaign that would not have occurred without the campaign,
Mhm.
right? So this is the true impact isolated from the rest of kind of conversion candidates. And because again, we match everything back deterministically to our identity graph, our Lift product is the most advanced and most accurate in the business. So we love to talk about it.
Mhm. So talk to me a little bit more about the identity graph. What exactly is that?
Yeah, so you can think of it as a giant spreadsheet that has about 99.8% of all US households,
Wow.
in the columns, right? And then, in the headers, we kind of have everything we know about those households, right? Things like, IP address is kind of the main signal that we
Sure.
that we use. Things like device IDs, maids, or mobile ad IDs are there but going away. So we don't really rely on those at all. We haven't for a long time. And then there's things like, behavioral audience, signals, right? So Claritas operates, not only are we measurement, but we are a massive, data and audience targeting company.
Mhm.
So we have kind of the Prism segment is our most widely known audience taxonomy. So that every US household is in one of the 68 Prism segments. And then there are, thousands of other audience segments that we have every household in. Right. So think of it as a giant spreadsheet that we operate that, even the US Census, comes to us for help, every few years, leveraging the same kind of data scientists that we have. So you can think of it as a giant spreadsheet that we use to do our measurement and not only measurement, but our optimization, right?
Mhm.
Optimization. We think of ourselves as an optimization platform, in three pillars. One is media optimization. That's the attribution and lift that we were just talking about. Two is audience optimization. Increasingly, our clients can see which audience segments would perform better than others in our dashboard, even if they're not targeting them, but then use that for optimization when they're thinking about audience targeting. And then three is creative. With the Arts AI acquisition, one of our newest solutions is this AI optimization product. It's essentially advanced DCO that changes the iteration of a creative in real time based on what's most likely to get that person to convert right before they
Mm.
hear or see an ad.
Mhm.
So the biggest question we get right when clients look at our measurement is like, how can we optimize? Right. Obviously, one way is change media partners. That's what we're traditionally known for. But the next easiest one is, hey, let's pull the creative lever and use creative as a point of optimization across your buy.
Mhm. And I have to ask because, we like to talk about this. How are you optimizing that creative so quickly? Are you using AI to alter it in some way and make it like a very quick,
Good question.
switch?
Right. So we're not actually building the creative, right? So
Okay.
with our solution, it's really an optimization. So, it can be as easy as we get like three different music beds, three
Ah,
calls to action. And so right there is three times three times three. That's 27 different iterations,
uh-huh.
right? We'll kind of put those iterations together in real time. That's most likely to get that person to hear or react or convert to the ad. And it could be a
Wow.
lot more than that too, right? So we do have some partners that use generative AI to
Uh-huh.
actually help an audio company build and, change creative. We do that as, we partner with companies to do that part. But then our solution does work well when there are thousands of creatives, right? Just more of a traditional DCO lens.
Hmm.
But yeah, to clarify, we're not actually building it. We are optimizing the creative based on the cohort in different iterations, kind of in real time. And we do that with a VAST tag. So it doesn't work in all podcasts, right? This is
Sure.
not working in all host-read podcasts, but it does work in anything DAI or programmatic or really any podcast that can accept our VAST tag, which is
Right.
a lot.
And you're talking obviously announcer read, right? So it isn't host read, but I think what's so fascinating to me about where we're at in the podcast space is I love this idea that we can take a host read ad and say this is high touch, right? So if I'm a creator and I've got, let's say 5 ad spots and I've got 3 really loyal brand partners where maybe I just love the product and I can create these really amazing host read ads. That's great. But then I've got these extra spots where I want to fill in with some programmatic and, those announcer read ads that are going to come through. And I love that, we're able to take this to a level where it does feel more competitive because I think that for so long, buyers have felt like podcast advertising was really difficult, right? And as much as the host read ad is so powerful, it's a high touch process, right? I mean, there's just no way around it. It's high touch.
Mhm.
We have to get that copy, that product to the host. They have to record the ad. We have to check, make sure the ad ran, make sure it ran correctly, all that jazz, right? And when you're talking, to these programmatic buyers in particular, they're really used to like this much faster pace. And I think they're used to fast pace when it comes to just the purchasing process, right? Like I just want to go in, hey, I got some additional budget. I'm going to go in this afternoon and place that budget. I don't want it to take me a week or 2 weeks to get this placed. And then number two, they're very used to like, let's look at instant results, right? I want to see, I put a social campaign up today. I've got these, 3 different versions running. I'm going to see what
Right.
works. I'm going to see what doesn't work, right? Like these people are moving quickly. They're making decisions about how to change things. And frankly, the host read ad just hasn't given the buyer that same kind of flexibility or maybe visibility. And it sounds like with the process and the tools you've put together, the buyer's able to really, number one, target who they want to target. Number two, they're able to track what that performance looks like. And then I think the key is they're able to modify it pretty quickly. So they have those levers to pull to see, an increase in performance. Is that kind of the design of what you guys have put together?
That's exactly right. Right. We like to kind of look at it as an optimization platform, that can close the loop, right? From
Hmm.
targeting, how does targeting actually affect my performance, my
Hmm.
outcomes? And then we can measure that and then optimize creative. So we are working with some, more sophisticated advertisers to do all three and seeing really awesome results. On the programmatic side, right? So we're doing this, in direct buys and programmatic, but
Sure.
I think the rise of programmatic and podcasting is interesting. I guess I started my career in programmatic 16 years ago, so maybe I'm a little biased, but I don't think everything should go programmatic. But I think all the work that Amazon is doing, right? The Amazon DSP, obviously, every week there's a new audio partner they onboard. I think Spotify is the most recent, which is pretty awesome. But they've got everyone now, and I think just for some advertisers who just need more control, right, in how they buy. Maybe it's ease of use, maybe it's just targeting, maybe it is just price, right? There's different buyers that I think are being exposed now to podcasts, media that they might not have without all of this exciting innovation in programmatic and some of the stuff we're doing in measurement.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, you are using, so in the past, pixel companies that I have worked with and interviewed and things have most often just used IP address and, um, user agent and IP address. Yeah.
Yep.
So, but with your device graph, you're able to go a whole step deeper, right? Than those. And so I guess what the question I'm trying to get to here is that going to be more, is that going to be better data, right? Because I think that that's one of the complaints that I get is that, your IP address refreshes every so often. When you are looking at a household, there's 4 or 5 people living in a household, like things like that. So I guess I'm just trying to determine, are you getting better qualified information about who that target actually is?
We certainly think so.
Hmm.
User agent and IP address mostly are still the most common ways of, the most common signals that we use in
Sure.
audio measurement. But yes, we have some, we'll say more privacy concerned clients, whether it's a publisher or advertiser that sometimes need something more custom, like a hashed email that we can do measurement with, right? So the short answer is yes, right? We have a lot of other signals that we can match back to our identity graph that we own and operate, right? So there
Hmm.
are obviously a lot of identity graphs out there that some of our competitors, maybe partner with or lease. But we think that, by owning and operating our own identity graph, we're able to have the highest match rates in the industry and have the most accurate attribution and lift.
Hmm.
Sure.
So, talk to me a little bit about privacy. Obviously, privacy is a huge issue, and I know you had mentioned that earlier that privacy really shouldn't be a concern. And I still think obviously it always is, and that comes from the side of the advertiser, right? They want to make sure that they're protecting their privacy. They want to make sure that they're protecting their customers' privacy. But we need some level of visibility in order to make these attributions. So how does privacy stand at Claritas?
Yeah, I mean, in the age of AI, I think privacy is as important as ever.
Mhm.
So I think the advantage we've had in the audio space is that like it has been more of an open ecosystem, right? With the biggest audio publishers, you know who they are, right? There are some of the biggest ones who have been a bit more, privacy concerned, and maybe that's because their business model is more about subscription and less about advertising. Who I think though are getting more willing to work with third parties like us.
Mhm.
So we are. It is an exciting time, right? Obviously the elephant in the room is YouTube, right? As more people consume podcasts on YouTube, there's obviously a big, YouTube audio partnership coming up with SiriusXM, who is a close partner of ours. So we think that's super exciting. We think that, could open up doors to hopefully, Google is listening to this and they say, hey, maybe if we let third parties measure, we get more investment, which we are confident of. So privacy is super important. I mean, at Claritas, I always get annoyed at all kind of the compliance things and hoops I have to jump through just to do anything. But because we are such a big data company and have so much data, we have some of the most kind of strict privacy compliance standards in the industry. But in how we're doing measurement in the podcasting space, I am excited, even though privacy is important. I think we're seeing things like more companies using clean rooms to do measurement, right?
Mhm.
Which is like as privacy compliant as it gets. So we are also kind of advancing our, custom solutions using clean rooms and
Mhm.
using clean rooms to build attribution partnerships with major publishers, right? Like I'll name Amazon because we recently, announced that we are deterministically measuring all Amazon media, right, through their DSP, their Prime Video, of course, their audio and podcasts. But we were one of the first companies to have that partnership with Amazon, which has been really great for our business. Not just audio, but
Mhm.
all of our partners who
Across the board, yeah.
might just have been using more rudimentary ways to measure their Amazon business.
Mhm. You kind of took my question right out from under me, but like I am ready for a pixel attribution solution for YouTube. So I would love you and your team at Claritas to work your magic. Let's get into YouTube because we're really struggling right now because so many advertising partners rely so heavily on the pixel, and we have a big move toward video. And so when we're working with like a lot of our direct response advertisers in particular, if the video portion is too high, they don't want to buy it. Or I feel like a perfect example, we have one of the larger shows that we work with that at the beginning of the year decided to move to Spotify video. And we
Mhm.
were very reluctant to let them do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, because you can't dynamically insert ads into Spotify videos. And number two, because you can't track from an attribution perspective what's going on in video. And what we're seeing is we're seeing that the results that this particular show that we've worked with for 6 years, that's like always sold out, we're getting comments from our advertisers like, hey, the show isn't performing as well as it used to. Well, it's performing just as well as it always did. The issue is now instead of measuring 100% of the impressions, they're measuring 20% of the impressions because so many of them have moved to the Spotify. And I know we're talking about YouTube, but it's the same thing, right? It's like if you take this, podcast and you push all of the viewers, the listeners into YouTube, then you can't measure it. And so then all of a sudden advertisers are saying, well, this isn't working. And it's like, well, yeah, it is working. You're not seeing it in the same way. And so we could really use that solution.
I would love to roll that out tomorrow, Heather. But I'd say, yeah, we're not there yet, and I don't think
Sure.
anytime soon they're going to let us just place a pixel. But they're finally taking meetings. And if you just kind of zoom out and look at the industry, right? I mean, obviously Google, YouTube, and then Apple, right? Apple invented the podcast, but they didn't, they just released HLS a few months ago, right? And I think that's going to be great for the industry. I mean, video or not video, they are finally getting involved, right? They might be taking a little toll, but as they should, because they invented the medium and they haven't really monetized that side of it. So I think you have Apple finally playing ball, right? Went to the London podcast show a couple of months ago, which, one of my favorite podcast conferences. Obviously London in March is lovely as well. March, April. One of the big sponsors was YouTube, right? And like
Hmm.
these are companies that hadn't really come to these audio conversations or conferences in the past, and I think they're finally playing ball. So I'm bullish, on YouTube. I think once they kind of see some of the, they're about to launch their partnership with SXM here, and I think they're in beta. They're about to launch, pretty soon. I think they're going to start to see the need for measurement and hopefully start to play ball with third parties like us and some of the others in the space. So I'm bullish. We're not there yet, but I hope by the end of the year we'll have more to talk about there. And again, it's an exciting time for podcasts, not just because of video, but I think that's going to help kind of all ships rise, and
Right.
hopefully some of the biggest companies in the world like Apple and YouTube kind of play ball with folks who know how podcasts work for a long time.
Yeah. I I don't think I have asked this question. How does pixel tracking work with HLS? I mean, I'm so excited about HLS very selfishly just because you can insert ads and that's my business. So I care about that. But can you pixel track? I mean, I guess like when I have watched on Apple, there's like turn video on, turn video off. So I would guess it's all kind of the same.
Yeah, it's kind of the same. That's the short answer, right? It's like
Okay.
it's the same kind of hosting platforms, right? So we're not really having to do much, but we've worked with some of their, beta partners that they rolled HLS out with to test and make sure everything
Uh-huh.
works, and it does. The main thing we had to do was kind of make sure that we're not double counting when someone goes from like toggles from video to audio.
Oh, right.
That's something that we're confident we're working through.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not totally different from our perspective in terms of attribution.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and I really do hope that hadn't occurred to me, but I really do hope that the numbers are correct and that we're not getting any double numbers from audio video switches. We've had that happen too many times, frankly, in the podcast space where, we haven't been counting things correctly. And then the minute you have to make an adjustment, it's just painful for everyone. So, yeah.
Totally. Yeah. No, you know, as the measurement provider for a lot of audio companies, sometimes when performance changes, we get blamed, right? It's like, what happened to your methodology? It's like, maybe it's time to refresh your creative, but we're not gonna go there. So yeah, I totally hear you on things changing in the industry, and we've obviously had, things break at some point, and it's bound to
Sure.
happen in a high tech company. But we have some great partners that are working with us as they roll out all these kind of new technologies and innovation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, if you had to give kind of one piece of advice to somebody that's maybe entering the podcast space, maybe they're a brand that's not advertised in podcasts before, what kind of advice would you give them to create a campaign where at the end of the day they're able to really sit back and see that it did perform, or I mean maybe it doesn't perform, but at least they can see this is how it performed.
Yeah, test and learn. I
Hmm.
mean, you know, I think I think what you see is some people just don't want to, they test something and then it might look good, but then they go back to what they were doing because they just don't
Hmm.
want to put in the effort to really have sea change
Hmm.
for how they're thinking about marketing. And this isn't just podcast related. But I think that is good advice for someone getting into podcasting. It's like test and learn, look at dashboards, right? I mean, we have so many great partners that they'll get the reports from us, maybe automated once a month. And then we're like, hey, take a look at our dashboard. You can actually see like your ideal frequency cap and where, should you raise the frequency? Things like, marginal, where does the frequency start to kind of have diminishing returns? What creative is performing better when and where, right?
Hmm.
So I think it's just testing, learning, being curious, and actually looking at the dashboards of whatever company you're working with, right? Instead of just looking at the Excel spreadsheets, which is maybe how you did things before. It's like take a look at the other, ways that analytics are coming your way and just, have some curiosity. Because I think we see that so much. It's like, and then we show the dashboard and like, oh, I didn't even know we could see this. We have access to this. It's like, yeah, no, you're paying for it.
Yeah.
So I think, it's be curious, test and learn, and, don't be afraid to fail, right? Because I think, um, people get afraid of placing a pixel, and they're afraid it's going to upset someone, but that they'll start to see real impact when they start to get into the podcasting space. I mean, it's such an exciting space, that's still growing, right? And people have been saying, oh, it's the emerging channel. It's not the emerging channel anymore. Like it's one of the main channels, right? It's,
Hmm.
podcasting is here, and so I was fortunate enough to go to the Cannes Lions.
Oh, I was going to ask if you went to
Yeah,
Cannes. How was it?
yeah, it was
Hot?
awesome. A couple weeks ago, it was my second time there, and just the best. I mean, it's my favorite. Not only because Cannes is beautiful in the summer, but it's just you get like all the biggest media companies in one space. You have really the smartest advertising folks, really competing in creative ways, which I think is
Hmm.
cool. But anyway, one of kind of the biggest themes in the past couple of years has been like, the creators, right? And it's like influencers are now showing up in Cannes. It's like, how does that really work with the way that Cannes has been going for many years? And now, this year it's like it's full on display and everyone wants to show, tout their influencer and their creator. And this is something that podcast has been doing for so long. So I think podcasting is just right there in this creator economy as one of the ways that these influencers are getting their audiences, right? It's an important way, definitely not the only way. But it's one that has increased focus. And I think was probably the most visible part of this past Cannes was just the amount of creator economy influencer presence was along the entire, the quaset, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. No, I've heard that from others too. I think it's really interesting. And to your point, I mean, I think everyone is like, okay, we've got these creators now. What do we do with them? And how do we, I mean, at Can in particular, right? How do we make sure that they're getting what they need and getting exposure, which is really interesting. But I
Mhm.
love you kind of started with this idea of testing. And I do think that that is so, so important. And we know advertising works, right? And sometimes I'll have companies that come and want to place ads that maybe it's like a mattress company or maybe it's a meal delivery company and they're like, well, does it work? And I just want to say, let's see how many mattress companies have succeeded with podcast advertising. Like, of course it works. How many meal delivery companies have succeeded? Like, of course it works. But you can't start something new and do it and expect that that first campaign is going to blow your socks off, right? The way that I look at it is that when you run a campaign, you place it, you put all these tools in place to make sure that you're doing everything right. And then, as you said, you have to watch your campaign. You have to see where did it gain traction, where didn't it gain traction. Then you have to pivot slightly, right? You have to drop some of the shows that didn't perform. You have to double down on some of the ones that did perform, right? So it's a process of continually, testing and tweaking. And when we look at the advertisers that succeed in a big way, the reason that they succeed is because they test a lot. They're out there, and I always like to say, like, they go, really shallow and wide. So they're not buying every show for 6 months. They're testing on thousands of shows sometimes, right? Or they're buying millions of impressions programmatically, and then they're seeing what worked, what didn't work. How do I tweak this? Oh man, this show is amazing. I'm going to double down. Maybe that one I'm going to place a 6 month buy, or I'm going to place a 12-month buy. But you have to have, I think, the aptitude to really want to test, and to your point, then you also have to look at the results, and you have to it's we all know this. Marketing and advertising isn't a passive, kind of profession. You have to constantly be aware of what is happening, and you have to be tweaking always. And it sounds like that's what you're really advocating for.
Yeah, totally, Heather. And you kind of called out, the DTC companies, right? Who we all know, they know that podcasting works, right? You think of mattress companies and folks like BetterHelp who really have like own the space in their category. But we are increasingly working with advertisers like auto advertisers, right? Some of the biggest car companies, not that they're selling cars online, right?
Mhm.
Besides Tesla, no one's really doing that, and Tesla doesn't advertise. But you have the auto companies doing things like, hey, let's place pixels on 6 different events with how our consumers are engaging with our website, right? So now if we have a podcast ad, someone hears it, then they're going to build a car on our website or find a dealer, right? They're actually looking at all these different website engagement analytics
Mhm.
using measurement, tracking. So we're not, obviously people aren't, clicking and purchasing the car online, but they're certainly learning more about it, and they're certainly going through that path to purchase. And, so really traditional advertisers are doing more in kind of the attribution and lift space, even if they're not selling things online, which has kind of been, the bread and butter historically.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I love that. Do you guys do case studies?
We do case studies. Yeah, of course. Of course. We got a bunch on our website, but I'll definitely
Okay.
send some as a follow-up.
Yeah, I would love to see some of that. I feel, one of the things that some of the companies that are, similar to Claritas do are like the benchmark reports. And I think it is so interesting, but I would love to look at more of those brand advertiser case studies, because I do think in podcasting we get so D2C,
Mhm.
kind of direct response, D2C, like very focused in on those advertiser types. And it's nice to see success in with bigger brands. And of course, we know that it's there. And at the end of the day, it really is about their KPIs, what are their goals, and how are they tracking and measuring it. But I think that is a perfect example, right, of an auto
Totally.
dealer where somebody's going to
Yeah.
go on the site, they're going to build a car, they're going to,
Right.
look for dealers,
Right.
things.
But
So,
not who you first think about when you think of like a podcast ad or,
right,
or measurement.
right.
One other thing kind of from your your previous comments, you mentioned like testing and learning and trying to buy, the long tail, a lot of not just one podcast, but a lot of podcasts. So some of the pushback from that strategy would be brand safety, right? Brand suitability. So I want to call out one of our partners in Barometer. They're a small
Mm-hmm.
company led by some really smart people, and we have a partnership where they can actually allow podcast advertisers to control their brand suitability and safety in real time using a Claritas Pixel and Barometers, kind of their transcription service to give that peace of mind mid-campaign. So not just like a post-campaign, right? To do post-campaign brand safety, you could go straight to Barometer. That's what they do. But to get it, real time in the middle of a campaign to give that peace of mind to some
Mm-hmm.
maybe more brand conservative advertisers is a real way to mitigate that brand safety concern with launching on a podcast network or on the long tail of podcasts.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, how does that work? Are you looking at just the creative? Or are you looking at the entire podcast with the barometer?
Yes, they're reading the entire episode level, right?
Okay.
It's the context of the right. It's not just like
Right.
one word, right? It's not just
Right.
keywords. So Barometer is really good at like understanding
Right.
the context of an episode. And also, so they'll work with the brand before to kind of understand their brand sensitivity, right? And to see, there's, a kind of sliding scale.
Hmm.
Um, and then really let that advertiser know more about the how maybe a word was used, right?
Hmm.
Or how something was mentioned. Because if it was mentioned in jest, most advertisers wouldn't care about it, right? If it was a joke, right? So,
Right.
it's important to just work with Barometer ahead of time on understanding kind of where that sliding scale is for the brand. And then our product is called AB Daily, which is, we can send daily reporting. Most people don't want it daily, but weekly is kind of more the
Yeah.
cadence. Really to give that peace of mind to that
Hmm.
advertiser that, what they're advertising on is suitable for their brand.
Right. And so if in that weekly report, maybe something gets flagged, then you could look at it and be like, ooh, this is not what I want. And then you could pull those ads like that type of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But more often
Yeah.
than not, it's like, oh, we heard a word, but it was used in this
Yes.
context. Like, thank you for explaining that. Like, we're good.
Right. No, for sure. Excellent. Well, if someone wants to work with Claritas, where is a good place for them to go to find you?
Yeah. So I am based in Miami. Our commercial team has been remote since before it was cool, but our headquarters is in Cincinnati, Ohio. So you can go to claritas.com and then you'll be able to find information on us. And there's a button that you can contact sales, which my team will get to for sure. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Jason Fialkov on LinkedIn. So
That
always
is nice.
yeah, we were talking about my name before. It's not the most common name. There's one other Jason Fialkov in the world, and he's like a commercial director in South Africa. So
Huh,
find me on LinkedIn.
very cool. Well, Jason, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Heather. It was an awesome conversation. Love a fellow Floridian in the industry.
I know you gotta love it. You gotta love it. Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope that you have enjoyed it. I just love getting into the weeds of really the measurement piece and what we can accomplish with true measurement in podcast advertising. So thanks for listening, and we will catch you again next time. Thank you for listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your source to a better understanding of the podcast advertising industry.